I had my hand on the doorknob for my daughter-in-law's elegant dinner when my lawyer called, "Don't sign a thing, they're setting you up." My stomach dipped, but decades of mothering taught me to breathe, square my shoulders, and keep my face unreadable. I went anyway, took the honor seat, answered their syrupy questions, and quietly turned the evening into evidence. That call didn't cancel dinner. It lit a fuse, and before long, when papers slid across a polished table, they learned I wasn't the one being managed. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. In the comments, I was rinsing a single teacup when the phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Isolde. Her voice poured through the speaker, warm as syrup, the kind of sweetness that makes you check the label twice. "Marjorie, I've been thinking about you," she began, breathy and bright. "We'd love to host a dinner for you this Saturday at the Sterling Club." The Sterling Club? Crystal light white linens and a piano you could hear from the elevator. I gripped the edge of the sink. Isolde rarely called. When she did, it was logistics, drop-offs, allergies, schedules. Tonight she lingered, called me Mom twice, and asked what perfume I liked. She said Michael would book a private room. She said the grandkids were excited to see me. She said all the right things. I heard myself say yes, and the word left my mouth like a small bird unhooked from a cage. I laid the phone down and stood in the quiet of my Houston kitchen, the air thick with late September heat, pressing through the window screen. I opened the cedar box on my dresser and lifted Harold's cufflinks, tiny silver knots still cool to the touch. I don't wear cufflinks, of course, but I keep them close to remind myself that steady hands once buttoned mornings beside me. From the closet, I drew the navy dress that fits like memory, honest, a little forgiving. I smoothed the fabric over my hips and held up the pearl necklace he gave me on our 40th. "You'll wear these when the children honor you," he'd said, a joke at the time, because the children were 5 and 3, and honor was a word they used for the flag at school. I set the necklace on the bedspread and imagined the Sterling Club's chandeliers scattering light across it. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt something I hadn't in a while, anticipation that didn't ache. I polished my low heels, the comfortable pair that lets me stand without thinking about it, and tucked a tissue into my purse the way my mother taught me. While the kettle clicked, I scrolled past photos of school concerts and soccer games I hadn't been invited to. I told myself the gap was ordinary, people are busy, schedules tangle. Yet the silence had a shape, and it fit too neatly around me. Still, maybe this was a bridge laid out plank by plank. Maybe Isolde had noticed the distance and wanted to close it. She had sounded sincere. She had said my name like it meant something. I set out my calendar and traced the week with my finger, pretending I needed to make space, pretending my evenings weren't mostly quiet. On the mantel, Harold's navy photo watched with his old, lopsided certainty. "Go," I could almost hear him say. "Let them love you if they remember how." I wiped a thin film of dust from the frame and laughed at myself for fussing. I thought about the last real family dinner we'd had before Harold's final winter. Isolde had brought a lemon tart and a bouquet the color of sunrise. She'd insisted we take the centerpiece home, then texted later to ask for the vase back. Small things, forgettable, maybe, except they stack like receipts in a drawer. When Michael stopped by after the funeral, he stood in the doorway as if one step more would set off alarms. He'd squeezed my shoulder, promised a new rhythm. I told myself not to tally. Love is not a ledger. I know that. Still, absence writes in ink. I pulled out a note card and jotted a few topics so I wouldn't lean too hard on questions about the children. Garden Plans, a book I'd finished the art fair in the Heights, where Harold and I once bought our crooked little ceramic bowl. I even practiced saying lightly that I missed them. Not an accusation, just a truth set down like a teacup. At my age, you learn to sand the edges of things you still need. Then doubts crept in the way dusk creeps up the street. The invitation was short notice for a place like that. Isolde's tone, sweet practiced, had the glide of a voicemail re-recorded until perfect. She'd asked if I still had my driver's license up to date, an odd question dressed as concern. She offered to pick me up early so you don't have to fuss with traffic, though she knows I manage fine in the afternoon. I shook off the hum under my skin and told myself not to invent storms from shadows. I sat at my vanity as cicadas stitched the evening outside. The glass showed me a woman with good posture and soft lines earned over 70 years. Brown eyes still sharp, hands that taught third graders to find Alaska on a map. Grief had thinned my frame after Harold, but it hadn't broken my spine. I dabbed blush a whisper of lipstick and pinned my hair back with the tortoiseshell comb he loved. I breathed in steady and slow. I remembered birthday cakes cooled on wire racks, science fair posters glued at the kitchen table, damp mittens by the vent in winters that felt longer than they were. All the work of an ordinary life, invisible until it isn't. If there was a ledger somewhere in the sky, I hoped it kept those small entries. By the front door, I slipped on my coat, though the night would be warm. Habit is a kind of armor. I checked the purse glasses keys, mints a folded photo of the grandkids at the zoo. I paused by the mirror, tilted my chin, and found the angle Harold used to call my Sunday morning brave. Maybe this time they'll finally see me. I whispered not as a plea, but as a simple hope laid gently on the threshold. I reached for the knob, and just then my phone began to ring. Just as I lifted my purse from the hook by the door, the phone rang again. The screen glowed with a name that pulled the air out of my chest, D'Angelo. He had been my lawyer for over 20 years, through Harold's will, and the transfer of the house title through small things like zoning letters and big things like probate hearings. He never called without a reason. I pressed the green button, steadied my voice. "Hello, D'Angelo." His words came clipped, urgent, no space for pleasantries. "Marjorie, listen to me. Don't sign anything tonight. They're setting you up." My throat dried. "What?" He repeated slower, heavier. "Don't sign anything. Not a card, not a guest book, not a form slipped between dessert menus. Do you understand?" My hand tightened around the phone. I wanted to ask why, but a clock ticked in my ear, and I realized he'd said all he could. "I understand," I answered, making my tone flat calm as if I were confirming the weather report. I set the phone down and stared at my reflection again. The woman in the glass looked steady, but my heart knocked against my ribs as though it knew what was waiting. The Sterling Club shimmered against the Houston skyline, its glass and marble glittering with the last of the September light. I drove in silence, parked at the valet line, and handed over my keys with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The lobby smelled of roses and polished wood. A piano tinkled from the bar notes too perfect to be casual. Then Isolde swept toward me, draped in silk the color of champagne. She wrapped me in an exaggerated hug, pressing cheek to cheek, while a friend lifted a phone and snapped a photo. "Mom, we're so glad you came," she cooed. Flashes popped, capturing me mid-blink, mid-breath, like evidence sealed in amber. Guests murmured greetings, some polite, some overly familiar, as though they'd been briefed on me beforehand. I walked beside her into the dining hall, feeling not like a guest, but like an actress asked to play herself in someone else's script. The long mahogany table stretched across the room, set with candles and crystal goblets that caught the light. My seat waited at the head, a small card with my name in elegant ink. At first glance, it looked respectful, queenly even, but the angle made me the focus of every gaze in the room. I eased into the chair spine, tall, refusing to hunch. Across from me sat a man I didn't recognize, clean suit eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. His name card read, Dr. Sutcliffe. He folded his hands and smiled the way a dentist might before asking you to open wide. The placement was no accident. I could feel the calculation in the air the way one feels humidity before a storm. The first courses arrived soup I barely tasted, and conversation hummed, yet the questions that floated my way carried a strange edge. "Do you often misplace things?" Marjorie Sutcliffe asked, as if it were idle chatter. I read somewhere that memory can get tricky after retirement. A woman at his side laughed softly too quickly. I lifted my spoon with steady fingers. "I keep a list by the phone. It works fine," I answered. Later, Isolde leaned in, voice syrupy. Do you remember last week's luncheon, Mom? You loved the peach cobbler. There had been no luncheon. My cheeks burned, but I let my smile stay calm. I haven't had peach cobbler in years, but I can still make one if you'd like. The table chuckled, some with discomfort, some with intent. I knew then this was not a meal, but an examination. Each answer I gave was logged, measured, and compared. As the main course was served, I replayed D'Angelo's words in my mind. Every smile around me seemed painted on. Orenthal sat halfway down the table, eyes fixed on his plate, never once meeting mine. His silence hurt more than Sutcliffe's questions. Isolde, by contrast, gleamed under the candlelight, hosting with the confidence of someone certain the night was hers. I pushed back the ache in my chest, noting every detail, the order of questions, the way Sutcliffe wrote something in a small notebook, the way a guest slipped a folder into her purse when she thought I wasn't looking. I realized then this wasn't reconciliation. This wasn't about family at all. It was a test, staged and rehearsed, and I was the subject. I adjusted my grip on the silverware, pressing the cool handle against my palm to hide the tremor that had begun in my hand. Across the table, Sutcliffe leaned forward, his elbows brushing the linen, his voice calm but prying. "Do you often misplace your keys, Marjorie? Do you remember what you ate last week?" His tone was gentle, almost soothing, but his eyes pinned me like a butterfly under glass. Around him, guests smiled politely, their forks pausing mid-air. No one interrupted, no one laughed. They watched me measuring how I would stumble or stand. I placed my hands on the table steady and said I left my keys on the counter yesterday morning, but I remembered before I shut the door, and last week I had chicken salad on Tuesday with iced tea. The precision in my voice echoed sharper than I expected. Still, the heat of scrutiny prickled across my skin. I knew I was being tested, not toasted. I refused to let my dignity slip through their fingers. Each question Sutcliffe posed, I countered with details anchored in fact. "Do you struggle with names?" he asked. I smiled faintly. I taught 100 students a year. I still remember many of them. Ask me about the capitals of their states while you're at it. A ripple of awkward chuckles ran down the table, but the doctor's pen scratched across a pad. Isolde leaned forward, nodding with that faux concern she had perfected. "It's just that we all worry about you, Mom. Sometimes you forget things, don't you?" The room tilted toward her, the word forget, circling like a bird of prey. I drew a sip of water, steadying myself. Forgetting is human. Twisting care into an accusation that's something else. Her lips tightened, but she disguised it with a laugh. I sat taller, refusing to shrink. Then came the comment that sliced deeper than Sutcliffe's questions. A guest I barely knew, a neighbor of theirs, perhaps smiled at me with thin lips and said, "It's good you're still able to come out like this." The laughter that followed was not cruelly loud, but it cut sharper for its softness. It was laughter, meant to signal to diminish. I felt it roll over me like cold water. My son Orenthal looked down his knife-tracing lines in mashed potatoes, eyes fixed on the plate. Not once did he meet mine. His silence pressed harder than the words. I held my posture, but inside humiliation flickered hot. I was being erased in real time. My presence turned into spectacle. The clink of dessert plates offered brief reprieve, but then my purse buzzed against the chair. I slipped a hand inside, shielding the glow of the phone screen. D'Angelo again. I pressed it to my ear under the cover of a cough. His voice was low, urgent. "They will try to make you sign papers tonight. Leave now." My heart pounded so loud I thought they could hear it in the silence between courses. I lifted my water glass, sipping as if unbothered, nodding at nothing in particular. My hand trembled under the table, but above it I was calm. I thanked the waiter who poured coffee, my voice even. Only I knew my pulse was racing faster than the clock on the wall. In that moment it all crystallized. This wasn't a dinner of reconciliation nor even a gathering of civility. It was a staged trap. Every glance, every question, every laugh had been rehearsed. I scanned the table, again Isolde's smile too smooth, Sutcliffe's notes too precise, Orenthal's silence too heavy. Even the guests seemed complicit, leaning into the performance as if waiting for the curtain to fall. The walls of the Sterling Club closed in its chandeliers suddenly harsh, the crystal goblets cold as steel. The room I had entered with hope now felt like a cage. My chest tightened, but I kept my head high. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed back my chair. The scraping sound cut through the laughter, silencing it in an instant. The scrape of my chair cut across the polished hall, stilling forks mid-air and laughter mid-breath. I stood slowly, the heat of 100 eyes pressing against my back. Isolde's manicured hand shot out, clamping my forearm with a syrupy smile that masked the grip of control. "Mom, please don't make a scene," she murmured through teeth clenched in performance. Orenthal muttered, his gaze low. "Just sit down, Mom." I reclaimed my arm with a sharp twist, forcing her fingers loose. My spine held tall as I nodded once to the server. Without another word, I walked the length of the table. The seat of honor they had chosen for me now stretched into a runway, each guest's stare a spotlight. I passed beneath the chandelier, its crystal light suddenly harsh, and stepped through the carved doors into the humid Houston night. Outside, under the portico, the air clung thick to my skin. The city pulsed with weekend energy, but here the silence felt raw. I pulled my phone from my purse, dialed for a cab, and kept my expression unreadable as the valet boys stole curious glances. A car pulled up. I slipped inside, smoothing my dress across my lap. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Isolde at the doorway, her smile, stiff hand waving too brightly to the guests behind her. The performance continued, but I had exited the stage. The cab glided into the river of headlights. City lights smeared against the wet pavement, reflections shivering with each bump of the road. I breathed slow, counting heartbeats until the hammering eased. D'Angelo's warning replayed, his voice low and urgent. "Don't sign anything. They're setting you up." My throat tightened, but I refused tears. Instead, I chose clarity. No arguing, no frantic calls, no frantic explanations. Observe, endure, then counter. I thumbed a message with 2 steady taps. Coming. The word glowed on the screen before I tucked the phone away. My pulse steadied. Strategy had replaced shock. D'Angelo opened his office door before I reached the second knock. The law firm's conference room blazed with fluorescent light, the smell of paper and coffee grounding me. On the table lay a manila folder already open as if he had been waiting. He gestured me in. "Marjorie, sit." I sank into the leather chair, bracing. He slid a page toward me, emails, headers, intact words, sharp as blades. My breath caught. The subject line read, "Emergency Competency Evaluation." My name glared back, followed by phrases that iced my blood-Sterling Club dinner with witnesses present. He fanned the pages like a deck of cards. Names of attendees matched faces I had just seen across the table. Sutcliffe identified as the evaluating psychiatrist. The family, friends, and neighbors listed as lay witnesses. A draft petition for guardianship sat beneath it all, printed in cold legal jargon. The language bled with accusation. Confusion, unsafe alone, financial risk. Each phrase designed not to describe, but to erase. My hands curled into fists on the table. So this dinner, I said, voice low, steady, was never about family. D'Angelo's eyes softened, but his nod was grim. He laid the next sheet, flat circling clauses with his pen. Broad discretion, best interest, expedited hearing. The cost of a signature, he explained, would be everything. Guardianship could strip me of my home, my accounts, even my right to decide where I lived. They would hold power to sell my house, move me into a facility, silence me with legal authority, all without consent. My jaw locked, but I made my voice calm. Then they nearly succeeded. He leaned back, folding his hands. They only succeed if you give them your hand, and you won't. From here, we build. Independent evaluation, documented evidence timing that favors you, not them. He reached into a drawer and set a small recorder before me, silver and unassuming. Keep logs. Note dates, times words. Don't confront directly. Let them talk themselves into proof. If they press you, stall. Use phrases like, "I'm overwhelmed, could you explain again?" Never yes, never no. Just enough to keep them circling. I picked up the recorder, its weight cool in my palm. He leaned forward. Play frail if you must, but inside you stay iron. I met his eyes. I can do that. A plan settled over me like armor, sharp edges hidden beneath calm silk. I left the office with the recorder in my pocket and a plan in my head. Isolde arrived the next afternoon without calling, a bouquet tucked into her elbow and a smile bright enough to make neighbors think we were close. "Just checking on you," she said, stepping past me as if the threshold belonged to her. The recorder D'Angelo gave me sat warm in my sweater pocket. I slid my hand over the knit and felt the tiny tremor of its motor. I guided her toward the kitchen where the light was forgiving and my counters were clear. She set the flowers in the sink instead of asking for a vase and began to wander. "Do you still make that peach cobbler? Or was that Harold's specialty?" Her tone was honey. "We should write your recipes down before they're lost." I filled a pitcher and found a vase from the lower cabinet. "I can still read my own handwriting," I said, arranging stems. And yes, Harold loved the cobbler. I baked it last month for church. She traced a finger along the oven dial. Gas can be tricky. Timers, knobs. You know? She smiled without teeth. "You remember my pot roast?" I asked. "It remembers me." She laughed. "You could jot tips on index cards, just in case." The recorder's red eye winked on the stove's chrome. I kept my breath even and the room steady. Soon the questions arrived dressed as kindness. "How's yard work these days? Do you hire anyone? What do they charge?" Her gaze skimmed the window like a realtor's. "Big houses get expensive. Heating, cooling roofs, and retirement accounts, do they cover it? Markets are unpredictable. This neighborhood is changing. Property values swing. A sale at the right time can be a blessing." I heard the net drop. Not my grief, not reconciliation. My house, my accounts. The decades Harold and I built with coupons and second pots of coffee. Anger flared, then cooled into something fine-edged. "I live within my means," I said evenly. "The roof was replaced last year. The budget works." Of course, she chirped too quick. "It's just that upkeep at your stage can be overwhelming." She left the phrase floating, a soft accusation masquerading as care. She pivoted to memories like someone stepping through stations on a tour. "There was a school fundraiser yesterday. The kids had a blast." Her smile lifted at one corner. "They were fine without you there." The words skimmed my skin and cut anyway. I looked at the calendar by the phone, blank where an invitation should have been. It joined other blanks recitals I heard about after holiday dinners, relocated photos posted with my name absent. Erasure does its best work in daylight. "Let me help," she said, already opening cabinets. Her hands moved with the tidy briskness of a health inspector. "Oh, this soup expired 2 weeks ago. Spices fade after a year, you know. And this throw rug tripping hazard." She hooked a finger under the corner and gasped. "We don't want accidents." She opened the fridge, hummed at a date stamp, and shut the door with her hip. "Do you still take your blood pressure pill in the morning? Or was it afternoon?" Memory is funny when we're stressed. Each line landed on the tape like a polished stone, harmless, until you counted the weight. Heat rose at my throat. It would have been easy to snap to tell her I'd cooked 40 years without burning the place down, that I raised her husband on casseroles and cash stretched to the penny. Instead, I softened the edges of my gaze the way you do when you look through a window and decide not to see yourself. Sometimes I set reminders, I said. Sometimes I don't need them. She nodded with practiced gravity like a counselor in a brochure. Routines help at this age. The recorder said nothing. Its quiet red blink was enough. I moved the vase to the table, turning it to hide the frayed doily beneath. She followed to the hall, pausing by the stack of mail I had deliberately left on the console. "Autopay can be confusing," she murmured. We could set something up. I'd hate for you to miss a bill." I thought of the ledger in my desk lines straight as a hymn. "I manage," I said. She glanced at the staircase and sighed. "Have you thought about a place with an elevator?" The word place hovered like a storm cloud that hadn't yet burst. At the door, she gathered me into a hug that smelled like florist paper. "Call me if you need anything," she said, pressing the sentence into my shoulder like a name tag I hadn't asked to wear. Michael and I only want what's best. When the latch caught, the house released a breath I hadn't known it was holding. I waited until her white car slid out of view, then took the recorder from my pocket and set it on the window seat. I rewound and listened. Just in case. "Upkeep at your stage. They were fine without you." The phrases marched past, polite and poisonous. I wrote the time and date in my notebook, the length of the visit, the objects she touched, the places she hummed. Proof has a temperature cool in the hand, ordinary to the eye, relentless on the page. The oak outside drew lace on the lawn we once raked as two. Anger settled into resolve. If they were building a file about a failing woman, I would build one about a scheme with a charming face. I pictured D'Angelo circling clauses the way teachers circle verbs, patient exact. I put the recorder back in my pocket and poured the stale water from the sink into the vase. The bouquet looked perfect from a few feet away. Up close, the petals had already begun to bruise. The next knock at my door wasn't flowers, it was my own son. The knock came at dusk, heavier than the one that had carried Isolde's bouquet the day before. When I opened the door, Orenthal stood there with a manila envelope clutched tight against his chest. His face was careful too. Careful as if every expression had been rehearsed in the car before he came inside. "Mom," he said, voice low, but not tender. He stepped past me without waiting for an invitation, setting the envelope on the kitchen table. The late light slanted through the blinds, carving shadows across his features. I noticed how his eyes refused to rest on mine. My chest tightened, an old instinct, warning of a storm I couldn't outrun. He pulled out the papers like a dealer laying down cards. Guardianship authorization, facility admission. The words landed like stones. "It's just a formality," he added quickly, trying for casual. "This will make everything easier for everyone, less stress for you." I didn't touch the papers. I saw the phrases in D'Angelo's folder written in cold legal ink. Every line was a trap disguised as kindness. My son's hands shook slightly as he straightened the stack, and I remembered them once clumsy with crayons clinging to mine when he crossed the street. He leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. "If you don't sign, the court will force you anyway." His jaw trembled. "I'm protecting you, Mom. Please." His words cracked at the edges, but the loyalty bent toward his wife, not me. The boy I raised was gone. In his place stood a man weighted with fear and persuasion, not his own. I let silence fill the room until it pressed on him harder than any reply. Then I said calmly, "I'll read it carefully later." I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it beside the bread box. I didn't sign. I didn't refuse. His brow furrowed, confusion flickering. He had braced for tears or fury, not control. He left with a stiff nod, and the door closed behind him like a seal on a letter I hadn't yet sent. Alone, I carried the envelope to the window seat, opened it, and read every line. Each clause was another cut at my independence, another attempt to turn me into property. Broad discretion, expedited hearing, best interest, words that caged rather than cared. I set the recorder beside the papers and pressed the button. Its small light winked at me, patient and unblinking. "You'll hear me when I choose to speak," I whispered. The twilight deepened outside, and the weight of betrayal pressed against the glass. Yet beneath it, a colder resolve hardened. That night, I called D'Angelo and told him it was time to set the trap. The phone felt heavy in my hand at dawn, as if it knew what I was about to do. I dialed D'Angelo's number with a steadiness I didn't quite feel. He answered on the first ring, voice sharp with early morning alertness. "It's time," I said. There was no pause on his end, no surprise. "We'll build the case while they think they're winning." He replied, his words clipped precise. "Stay calm. Every move they make from here is evidence." By the time the sun had fully risen, I was in his office again. The blinds were half open, letting in a thin wash of gold across the conference table. He slid my small recorder toward me, checked the battery, replaced the card, and set it down beside a thick binder labeled Observations. "You'll keep this with you," he said, tapping the cover. Inside were lined pages divided by dates with neat prompts. Note comments, note tone, record context. He added a second sheet, a checklist, chain of custody, secure storage, no improvisation. I nodded. My role was clear. "You want me to play frail." "Yes," he said, watching my eyes. "But keep them guessing. Confusion in public, clarity in private. It will turn their own script against them." I agreed, though the idea of acting weak sat bitter on my tongue. Still, it was armor disguised as fragility, and I had no shame in surviving. Then came the harder step. D'Angelo pulled a new folder across the table, this one marked Irrevocable Trust. He explained in steady tones once my house and accounts were transferred, no guardianship could override it. They could try to paint me as confused, unfit, even lost, but they could not touch what I had secured. Relief fluttered in my chest, quickly chased by dread. A shield, yes, but also a final lock. I had lived in that house with my husband, raised my son under its roof. Signing it away, even for protection, felt like surrendering part of myself. "You'll still live there," D'Angelo assured me. "The difference is they won't own it, not through you, not through the court." I left his office with both folders pressed to my chest, feeling their weight heavier than stone. That afternoon back home, I heard the lighter knock of innocence. My granddaughter Astria stood on the porch, school bag slung over her shoulder, cheeks pink from the September heat. She bounced inside, her voice bubbling with the casual cruelty children don't know they carry. "Grandma, why weren't you at my choir concert? Mommy said you forget things now." The words were a blade, slipped between ribs. I remembered every recital, every holiday, every moment I had begged to be included. But now in her eyes, I was the grandmother fading from memory, erased before I had left the room. I knelt, held her shoulders, and forced a smile. "I will always remember you," I whispered, swallowing the salt that rose in my throat. She hugged me quick and innocent, then skipped away, leaving the house heavy with her echo. When the door closed, I set the recorder on the table and pressed the button. Its light glowed, steady, patient. I spoke softly into the silence. "If they want to erase me, I'll make sure the world remembers." The plan had begun, and silence had become my sharpest weapon. Linked to next chapter, the following weekend, I opened the door to find Isolde and Orenthal smiling, too brightly, brochure in hand. The weekend sun filtered through the blinds as I heard the doorbell ring. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, when I opened the door, I found Isolde and Orenthal standing together, smiling too brightly. In Orenthal's hand was a glossy brochure. "Mom," Isolde said, her voice sugar-coated, "we've been thinking about you. We want what's best." She pressed the bouquet of lilies into my hand and stepped inside before I could answer. Orenthal trailed behind, avoiding my eyes. The air shifted instantly. This was no visit of love. They settled into my living room like they owned it. The brochure slid onto the coffee table with a deliberate gesture. On the cover, bold letters read, "Meadowbrook Manor Assisted Living for Independent Seniors." The glossy photograph showed manicured gardens and smiling nurses guiding residents along paved paths. I sat down slowly, my fingers resting on the arm of my chair. I let my eyes drift over the page. Under the photographs in smaller print, I read the words "Safe Transition and Property Liquidation Services." My chest tightened. They hadn't come to talk about family. They had come with a plan to erase me. Isolde leaned forward, her smile unwavering. "You'll be surrounded by people your age. No more worrying about bills or remembering dates. Everything will be taken care of for you." Her tone dripped with condescension, every word disguised as concern. I felt the sting beneath the sweetness. I was still here, still capable, yet she spoke as though I were already fading. Orenthal sat silently beside her, his eyes fixed on the carpet, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. He didn't look at me, not once. I shifted slightly, my hand brushing the inside of my pocket. The recorder clicked on with the faintest pressure of my finger. I let my face soften, pretending to consider. "It does look peaceful," I said quietly, my voice steady. "Perhaps you're right." Isolde brightened, mistaking my feigned agreement for surrender. She continued to outline the amenities, weekly activities, supervised care-managed finances, while Orenthal nodded along silently. Every word, every phrase was captured. I gave them nothing more than mild responses, the perfect facade of fragile contemplation. When they finally rose to leave, Isolde patted my shoulder as though I were a child. "Think about it, Marjorie. We'll come back soon to discuss details." She carried her brightness out the door like a banner of victory. The moment the door closed, I exhaled slow and controlled. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and pressed stop. Their voices, their condescension, their plan, it was all there. I set the device on the coffee table beside the brochure, its red light still glowing. I whispered into the silence. If they want to lock me away, they'll find themselves trapped instead. That night, I placed the recorder on D'Angelo's desk, its red light still blinking. D'Angelo leaned back in his chair, listening to the playback from my recorder. Isolde's syrupy tone filled the room, every word sharpened by her intent. When the final click of the recording ended, he set the device on his desk with a thud that carried more weight than any gavel. "We'll keep our voices even," he told me. "You won't sign anything. If they press you, ask for time. I'll take every clause apart and we'll put the truth on record." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The Houston skyline shimmered outside his office window, a city alive with ambition and greed. My heartbeat was steady now, no longer fluttering in panic, but drumming with purpose. By the time I left his office, I carried not fear, but a plan. The glass doors of Hartwell and Associates glided open, and the chill of their boardroom met me like a staged performance. The table gleamed under recessed lighting, a view of downtown spread wide behind them. Isolde smiled too wide. Orenthal fixed his gaze on the floor, and Dr. Sutcliffe's file lay ready at his elbow. Mrs. Calloway, Mr. Hartwell said, sliding a heavy packet toward me. "This is simply to ensure your comfort and safety." I laid a hand on the packet, but didn't open it. "Comfort," I repeated as though the word were foreign. D'Angelo leaned forward and began. "Let's review together, shall we?" His voice was calm, but each word struck like a hammer. He pointed at the clauses, buried deep authority to liquidate assets without notice, waiver of accounting facility placement, at guardian's sole judgment. Hartwell cleared his throat. "These are standard protections." I looked across the table, catching Isolde's eye. "Tell me, where am I in these pages? I don't see myself. Only what I own." The room grew heavier, with silence. Orenthal shifted, but still he said nothing. D'Angelo placed another folder on the table, crisp and deliberate. "This conversation is unnecessary. Last week, Mrs. Calloway transferred all property and accounts into an irrevocable trust. Guardianship cannot override it." For the first time that morning, Hartwell blinked. Isolde's knuckles turned white around her pen, the smile on her lips fighting to hold its shape. I felt no need to add more. The papers on the table spoke louder than I ever could. D'Angelo wasn't finished, and here he continued, sliding a different document forward. Is an independent capacity evaluation by Dr. Kellerman, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist, signed, notarized, and dated. He pressed play on the recorder. The voices of my son and daughter-in-law filled the sleek boardroom. Words like safe transition and property liquidation bounced off the polished glass, and then Orenthal's voice, hesitant breaking, saying, "If you don't sign, the court will force you anyway." Hartwell cleared his throat again, his face flushed. "Perhaps we should postpone further discussion." No, D'Angelo interrupted. His tone was firm, final. "There is nothing to postpone." The room went still. Isolde's smile cracked at last, the varnish peeling away under the weight of truth. The room did not breathe after D'Angelo shut off the recording. I watched Isolde's smile loosen at the edges, like a ribbon pulled too tight. Then it snapped. "We can't keep babysitting this forever." She said each word hard as cutlery. "The house needs to move. Placement should have happened before the holidays." Hartwell rubbed his temple. Sutcliffe capped his pen, stopping the ink and the thought. I folded my hands and said nothing. I taught ninth graders for 30 years. Silence is a mirror. D'Angelo slid the folder closer to her. "Could you clarify what you mean by placement and move the house?" His voice was soft as rain. Isolde rolled her shoulders at the gentleness. "You know exactly what I mean, streamlining, liquidating. Getting things in order so we don't have another winter like last year." She threw a quick glance at Orenthal, who stared at the skyline instead of me. I drew one long breath until my pulse steadied. Then I asked the only question that mattered quiet enough to pass for mercy. "When did you decide I no longer belonged in my own life?" Isolde blinked, jaw ticking. "Don't be dramatic, Marjorie." She turned back to Hartwell. "It's a timeline problem. We can't spend all season managing meds bills callers." Heat rose, not anger clarity. "Which bills did I miss?" I asked. Hartwell checked a page, then another, finding no example to hold. D'Angelo did not smile. He turned the guardianship packet toward the light, so its worst lines showed broad discretion, asset liquidation without consent, waived accounting placement at the guardian's sole judgment. I let the words sit like cold metal. Isolde inhaled sharply as if the room thinned. "Look, we're just trying to avoid chaos," she said. "It's not personal." My laugh was dry. "It is entirely personal," I said. "It is my days, my lock, my name." Sutcliffe's pen hovered. He met my eyes. There was no tremor. D'Angelo tapped a finger on the trust papers he had introduced an hour earlier. "There is also the matter of the irrevocable trust," he said. "Deed recorded. Transfers executed. Your petition cannot reach what it doesn't own." Hartwell frowned at the document, recalculating. The silence had edges. In that sharp hush, the city hummed beyond the glass, reminding me days outlast scenes, and life outlasts a meeting. When my son finally looked back at me, his eyes seemed older than his face. "Izzy," he said carefully, "this isn't what we said." It was the first time he spoke to her, as if I could hear. We said it would be easier. The folder trembled under his hand. He pushed it away from me an inch, then another. I remembered his first school play, how he froze until he saw me mouthing the line. Tonight there was no line to borrow. He had to find his own beyond him. The city shone indifferent and exact. Our reflections looked like a family and felt like witnesses. D'Angelo cleared his throat, a gavel before the gavel. "Here are our boundaries," he said. "Withdraw the petition. Cease all discussion of facility placement. All future communication goes through council. If there's another attempt to pressure Ms. Lane, we'll seek sanctions and consider complaints to the boards." Hartwell murmured, understood the way a man steps back from a curb as a bus roars by. Sutcliffe closed his file, tucking away a blade that had lost its shine. I rose, not triumphant, simply finished. For the first time in weeks, air entered without permission. In the hallway, the carpet hushed us. Orenthal hurried after me. No lawyer in sight, shoulders rounded as if the ceiling lowered. "Mom," he said, voice thready. I didn't know it would look like that. I was trying to make it easier. I kept my eyes on him, not the doors. "You will not speak to me, unless it is with respect," I said even. "And you will not use the children to hurt me." He nodded, once tears bright a man on the edge of a better choice. The elevator arrived with a bell. He stayed behind. I stepped in spine-straight hands, steady the city, a grid of light below. The cab took me home by streets that knew my tires. I brewed tea I didn't need and stood at the sink while the kettle breathed. On the table lay the brochure they left: a garden, a fountain, a sentence about liquidation folded into promises of peace. I slid it into a folder labeled Evidence and wrote the date. I've always believed in tidy drawers and tidy records. They underestimated the second half. By afternoon, D'Angelo emailed a short note confirming Hartwell's withdrawal of representation. The words were unadorned, but to me they sounded like a lock clicking. I took my planner, the same leather book I've kept for decades, and penciled one line beneath the day's square boundaries set: trust standing, dignity intact. I pressed my palm to the planner until the paper warmed. Outside, a bus sighed. I took it as my metaphor noise passing schedule intact. Then I watered the fern and opened the blinds so light could find the leaves. Inside, the quiet anger cooled into resolve. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. Not the old order I am. No one's nostalgia, but the right to live without someone else's hand on the thermostat, the mailbox, the calendar. I thought of Astria's honest eyes, how lies prefer echo chambers, and truth prefers air. They'll learn to breathe it, I told the room, or they'll cough. Within days, consequences arrived. Their lawyer withdrew, and Isolde went looking for a new way to hurt me. Morning light poured through my kitchen like warm water, and the house felt larger than it had a week ago. I stood at the sink with my mug cooling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quieter hum of my own breath. D'Angelo forwarded an email from Hartwell's office. They were withdrawing to reassess. No apology, just retreat. Isolde went quiet. Orenthal sent a text that read, "Need time." I set the phone face down and stepped onto the back porch. The hose shivered in my hand as I watered the roses, and I repeated the sentence that steadied me in that boardroom: I do not have to explain my right to stand in my own life. By noon, a neighbor mentioned a vague post online about keeping elders safe. She did not say my name. She did not have to. I thanked her for the tomatoes and sent a note to D'Angelo. He replied with a draft 3 spare sentences, stating that all family logistics and any concerns about my welfare should be directed to counsel, and that public speculation helps no one. No heat, no accusations. Paper with a spine. I printed it, signed in blue, and slid a copy into a folder labeled Boundaries beside the one marked Recordings. That afternoon, I emailed the principal at Astria's school. There was a public rehearsal before Saturday's concert, and I wanted a seat in row 7 with a clear view of the risers. I'm attending as a member of the public. I wrote no pickup, no backstage. The reply was courteous and brief. On the day, an administrator paused at the door when she saw me. I offered a letter confirming my capacity, no details, only clearance, and a short note from D'Angelo asking that any concerns be routed to him. The hesitation passed like a cloud, and I took my chair. The first notes rose thin and brave. Astria scanned the crowd, found me, and lifted her hand in a small wave she thought no one else would see. My chest loosened. A woman behind me whispered about supper. A man in front adjusted his hearing aid, and for 20 minutes the only thing that mattered was a row of children trying to find the same pitch at the same time. When the last chord held, I did not clap first or loudest. I breathed and let the sound settle around me like a quilt of ordinary days. On Sunday, we chose neutral ground Memorial Park beneath the live oaks. I laid out a small picnic sandwiches cut in halves fruit in a plastic container, napkins folded like little sails. Orenthal arrived with the children. Isolde did not. He stood with his hands in his pockets as if he had to weigh them down to keep them from shaking. We talked about small things first, a squeaky bike chain, a spelling test, how the humidity makes Jasmine stubborn. When he braced for accusation, I offered only one line. "You are welcome here when you show respect." He exhaled some of the fight, leaving his shoulders. I didn't see how far this went. he said, staring at the scattered pecan shells at our feet. I nodded once. The children ran toward the pond, laughing at their shadows on the water. I watched my son watch them and remembered the way he used to lean into me when thunder rolled. Some instincts you keep, some you return to the shelf when they no longer fit. As we were packing up, Isolde rolled to the curb in sunglasses and a bright smile. We should clarify the visitation schedule, she said, as if I had blurred any line. The children need routine. I kept my face even. Please email counsel. She waited for me to bite so she could call it drama. I let the bait drop and studied the oak leaves moving in the wind. At last, she adjusted her sunglasses, told the children to buckle, and drove away with a chirp of tires. On Monday, D'Angelo sent a memorandum to the school and the Homeowners Association. Any welfare checks or questions about my capacity would go through his office with documentation attached. He used the words process and accountability. No heat, no smoke, just procedure. I printed 2 copies and slid them into the boundaries folder. There are days when a kitchen becomes a command center and the only battle is to keep paperwork in its place and dignity in yours. I wiped the counter, straightened the stack of letters, and felt the room steady around me. That evening, the kids came for an hour with their father. We spread homework on the table that has seen 20 years of science projects and spilled milk. I made grilled cheese triangles and cocoa in the thick mugs I keep for winter. Astria asked whether jasmine blooms at night. It does, I said, but it saves the best fragrance for when you've been patient. We stepped onto the porch and breathed in the sweet air. The boys argued over who could see the first star. I taught them the old trick: look slightly away and let your eyes soften. They laughed when the dot appeared. For a moment, the future felt like a room with its windows open. When they left, the house settled into its own breath again, quieter, not empty. I opened my observations binder and wrote 1 sentence in the neat teacher's hand that has carried me through every storm. I am still here, and they can see me. I closed the cover, stacked it with the other files, and turned off the kitchen light. The quiet did not feel like exile anymore. It felt like a room I had earned. I stood there listening to the clock count a gentle yes. Then I slept. The certified envelope arrived the next morning, heavy enough to change the air when it hit my mat. The courier asked for my signature, and the pen shook, only because the envelope was so stiff. On the hall table, the morning light slid over the parquet like water, and my breath slowed to meet it. I slit the edge with the letter opener I keep from my teaching days and felt a small gust of paper, as if the house exhaled. Inside was a clerk's notice from the county. The guardianship petition was withdrawn and dismissed with prejudice. A second page clipped to the first announced Hartwell and Associates had withdrawn as counsel. I read each line aloud, steady, because a steady voice makes a fact sit down. I stood there a while, palm flat on the cool wood, letting the quiet return its weight back to me. The envelope itself felt lighter after that, as if it had only been carrying fear. I exhale. By 10, I was in D'Angelo's office, the glass-walled room where we had planned the quiet parts of my resistance. He slid a folder toward me, a simple measure written like a fence line: mutual non-disparagement. No contact about placement and all logistics routed through council. The school memo and HOA notice stayed in force. The recordings and capacity letter were archived with timestamps and a tidy index. He added 1 more sheet. I hadn't expected the state medical board had opened an inquiry into Sutcliffe's conduct at that dinner. "We won't chase their gossip," he said, tapping the page. "We'll answer with records." I signed where he placed tabs. "No heroics," he reminded me. "If they push again, let them push on paper first." I nodded, and for the first time I believed that calm could win. In the quiet of my kitchen that afternoon, the phone rang with a number I didn't have to brace for. Mom Orenthal said the word coming out like he was testing a step in the dark. "I'm sorry." I thought easier meant better. I turned the faucet and watched a thin stream ribbon into a glass until it steadied. Respect first, I said. Everything else can be work. He didn't argue. We set rules the way you set a table, deliberate and plain scheduled visits with the children. No surprise drop-ins changes by email and contact through counsel if tempers rose. Silence worked like a level, making the surface true. Before he hung up, he tried a small reach. Can I bring the kids Saturday? You can bring them when you come with respect. I answered not unkind. After the call, I wrote our terms in my binder in the same hand I once used for lesson plans, and the house felt just a little more mine. We tested the bridge that Saturday at Memorial Park on a bench under live oaks that shook their leaves like little green bells. Astria ran ahead, braids flying. Her brother dribbled a scuffed soccer ball and asked me to time him to the next lamppost. Orenthal sat with his elbows on his knees, eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. We watched the children and let words collect in small, harmless piles. The heat, the mosquitoes, the jasmine blooming against the fence. If it turns unkind again, we stop, I said once. He nodded, jaw tight. On the walk back to the car, we said almost nothing. It felt like crossing a narrow bridge step by measured step. I did not forgive him there, and he did not ask me to. We only kept the bridge from swaying until we reached the other side. Now. Consequences arrived as emails instead of fireworks. D'Angelo forwarded Hartwell's formal withdrawal. The clerk's confirmation of dismissal landed in the record. The school acknowledged our memo. The HOA logged the note to direct any concerns to council. There was a single line from D'Angelo that I reread because it named the shape of what we had built. We don't chase punishment. We protect your peace. I printed the message and clipped it into my binder behind a tab labeled Boundaries right beside the observations. I brewed tea and sat at the table while the printer cooled, then walked room to room. The lamp was only a lamp. The phone was only a phone. Even the front door, once a mouth where trouble spoke, returned to being a door. I did the small domestic things that tell a life it is safe watered. The fern-folded towels checked the stove twice and let the house steady me. 2 months past counted not by court dates, but by library books, grocery lists, and evenings when the air softened enough to open the windows. One dusk, I set 4 plates on my dining table, 2 smaller ones for the children mine, and a 4th for a son learning to arrive on time. The jasmine cutting D'Angelo had dropped off as a joke had rooted and taken to the light. Its leaves shone, like they had decided to belong. I folded the napkins into sails and put the butter in a dish instead of leaving it wrapped. I wasn't rehearsing forgiveness. I was setting a room where respect could sit and stay. When the porch light clicked on, I carried the teapot out and sat in the doorway. I thought of that first invitation, how I had almost let a staged dinner become a signed goodbye to my own life. I typed 1 line to D'Angelo, door closed there. Door opened here. He didn't reply, and I didn't need him to. From the sidewalk came the slap of sneakers and the laughter of children. I poured tea and returned to my table. My table in my house with my people, and no one would sign that away again. So, as a mother who nearly signed her life away, here's what I know now: dignity needs boundaries, love needs proof, and silence can be a strategy, not surrender. Document, ask questions, and bring a witness. Calm is not weakness. Protect your home, your name, and the children's right to a safe, respectful family. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love? What did it change? If this story helped or moved you, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't say why, and if you want more true, heart-strong stories, please subscribe. Your voice helps others stand tall. Share 1 lesson you'll use this week or 1 boundary you'll set. Thank you. All.